I still can't believe I'm even writing this. To be honest, I've replayed the last few months over and over in my mind, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. How did it get to the point where my wife, the woman I've loved and trusted for over 10 years, was sneaking around behind my back with him? Let me start from the beginning. My name's Jason, and my wife's name is Emily. We've been married for 7 years and together for 10. We met in college, both of us in our early 20s, full of life and love for each other. We had that kind of relationship people envy, or at least I thought we did. We were best friends. We shared everything, and I was sure we could conquer anything together. At least that's what I believed before all of this. For the past year, I've been traveling a lot for work. It wasn't ideal, but I had to do what I had to do to provide for our family. The job paid well, and we had just bought a house, our dream home, or so I thought. Emily had expressed how much she hated being alone during these trips. We even talked about her finding more ways to stay occupied. I felt guilty, but I thought we had a strong enough foundation to make it through the distance. What I didn't realize was how close she had gotten to our neighbor, Mike. He lives across the street, just a few doors down. He's been in the neighborhood for a couple of years now. He's in his late 40s, divorced, no kids. He seemed like a good guy, always offering to help out with little things around the house when I wasn't around. I thought he was being friendly. After all, we were neighbors, and Emily had always been outgoing, making friends with just about everyone. Mike wasn't like most of the guys around here. He had a certain arrogance about him, a swagger that made him stand out. He was fit for his age, always walking around shirtless, like he had something to prove. I never really thought much about it, though. Emily would roll her eyes when she saw him walking around like that, or at least that's what I assumed. Looking back now, I should have seen it, the little things that started to add up. The way Emily would talk about Mike, always mentioning how much he helped out while I was gone. It didn't seem strange at the time. I figured she was just being neighborly. But then there were other things, small things like how she would spend more time outside when he was around, how she suddenly seemed to have this new energy whenever he was mentioned. There was one time I came home early from a trip. I had been away for a week and wanted to surprise Emily. I remember parking a few houses down, sneaking in through the back to catch her off guard. The house was quiet, but when I got to the living room window, I saw it. Mike, in his house, pacing around, completely naked. And there was Emily, standing at our window watching him. She quickly shut the blinds when she saw me walking up the steps, flustered, saying something about needing fresh air. I brushed it off as awkward embarrassment, never once considering what it might have meant. That moment was the first crack, but I ignored it. I chalked it up to weird neighbor stuff. But something deeper must have been growing right in front of me, and I was too blind to see it. As the months went on, I continued to travel. Each time I left, Emily seemed a little more distant, like she was slipping away, bit by bit. The connection we had, that bond one once felt was unbreakable, was starting to fray at the edges. I convinced myself it was just stress, or maybe the long distance was harder on her than she let on. But I never suspected that she was getting closer to Mike while I was gone. Mike and I had even become friends, or at least I thought we had. I would sometimes go over to his place for a drink, talking about life, work, and whatever else came up. I never thought to question the way he'd smile when he mentioned helping Emily out while I was away. It wasn't until much later that I realized how much of a fool I had been. Then came the trip that changed everything. I had to leave for a week, and something about Emily's behavior that morning gnawed at me. She was distant, almost like she didn't want to kiss me goodbye. I shrugged it off. It's just one of those days, I told myself. But what I came home to was worse than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the slow, creeping realization that everything I thought I knew about our life, our marriage, was a lie. And it was all about to come crashing down. I never expected to be the guy whose wife was sleeping with the neighbor. But as I found myself standing in my own living room, staring at the mess they'd left behind, I realized that maybe I had been ignoring the signs all along. And the more I uncovered, the worse it got. Mike had always been around. Friendly, helpful, always there when I wasn't. And apparently so was Emily. But this wasn't just about catching them in the act. What came next was so much worse. When I found out about the affair, everything in my life seemed to spiral into chaos. Emily tried to explain herself, but the words felt empty, like wind slipping through my fingers, impossible to hold on to. She swore it had only happened once, that it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment while I was away on that business trip. But after what I'd seen, I couldn't bring myself to believe her. The truth had become slippery, and I was drowning in the weight of it all. I moved out of our bedroom that night. It was impossible to sleep next to her, knowing what she had done, and with him. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them together in our home, on our bed, in my space. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a mix of rage and sadness that left me on the verge of breaking. I stayed on the couch in the living room for days, avoiding any direct conversation with her, barely speaking unless it was about something mundane, like bills or grocery lists. The silence between us was suffocating. A few weeks passed in this strange, unbearable limbo. I hadn't told anyone about the affair, not even my closest friends. I didn't know how to explain it. I wasn't ready for the pity, for the looks of disbelief that would surely come when people found out that my wife had been sleeping with our neighbor. The shame of it clung to me like a wet blanket I couldn't shake off. Emily acted as if she was trying, saying she wanted to fix things, but how could I even begin to trust her again? And then, just when I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, she dropped a bombshell that shattered whatever hope was left. It was a Sunday morning, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. Emily walked in quietly, her face pale and drawn, and I knew something was wrong even before she said a word. My heart sank because I had grown to expect bad news. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed her hair behind her ears. She didn't meet my eyes. "Jason, there's something I need to tell you." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but there was a tension underneath that made my stomach knot up. I put my phone down and braced myself. I found out I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Pregnant? How could that be possible? I mean, we hadn't been intimate in weeks. Not since before I found out about the affair. I stared at her, my mind racing, desperately trying to make sense of what she was saying. Emily sat there, her lips trembling as she waited for me to respond, but I couldn't. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground beneath me was crumbling. "Is it mine?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, harsh and full of bitterness. Her face crumpled, and she started crying, but I didn't care. I needed to know. I had to know. "I don't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I really don't know, Jason. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And just like that, my world collapsed. The possibility that this child, this life-changing news, could be the result of her affair with Mike was too much for me to handle. It was like I was watching everything from the outside, my own voice sounding distant as I demanded more answers. When did you find out?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How long have you known?" "Just a few days ago," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't know how to tell you. I've been going crazy, trying to figure it out. I don't know what to do." "What do you want me to say, Emily? That it's going to be okay? That we'll figure this out together?" I stood up, my body trembling with anger. "You don't even know whose it is." Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I wanted to comfort her. But then the rage hit me again, white-hot and uncontrollable. I paced the kitchen, running my hands through my hair, trying to breathe through the suffocating anger. There was no way I could do this. I couldn't raise a child that might not be mine, a constant reminder of her betrayal. "Have you told him?" I asked, my voice sharp as a knife. "Does Mike know?" She shook her head furiously, her face red from crying. "No, I haven't told him. I don't want to. I don't even want him involved, Jason. I want to work on us. I want to fix this. Please." But how could we fix this? How could we even begin to repair something so broken when we didn't even know who the father was? My mind was spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to do anything to make the pain go away. "I don't know if I can do this, Emily," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can be a part of this. Her eyes widened in panic. Please don't say that, Jason. Please. I love you. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. We can figure this out. We can do a paternity test. We can. I need some space, I interrupted, stepping back from the table. I need to think. I can't do this right now. And with that, I left the house. I didn't know where I was going or how long I'd be gone, but I needed to get out, to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of it all. My mind was in turmoil. Emily was pregnant, and I had no idea if the child was mine or the result of her affair with Mike. The thought twisted like a knife in my gut. I drove for hours, aimlessly trying to process everything. The pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty. It was all too much. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but one thing was clear. Life as I knew it would never be the same again. I drove for what felt like hours, aimlessly circling the same streets, the same old neighborhoods, as if somehow driving in circles would help me make sense of the chaos in my mind. But there were no answers to be found in the blur of passing houses or the darkening sky. It wasn't until the gas light flickered on that I finally pulled over into a dingy gas station, parked the car, and just sat there. Everything in my life had been ripped apart, and now there was this pregnancy. This child, hanging in the balance, mocking whatever was left of my sanity. I should have felt something, fear, anger, sadness, something. But instead, I just felt hollow. Like all the emotion had been drained out of me and there was nothing left to give. The shock of Emily's confession still hadn't worn off. Pregnant, possibly with his child. I replayed her words in my mind over and over, torturing myself with the sound of her saying, I don't know whose it is. How had it come to this? I must have been sitting in that car for nearly an hour before I finally picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen. My thoughts scattered. I wasn't even sure who to call. I hadn't told anyone about the affair. Part of me had been too embarrassed to admit what had happened. Like somehow, it was my fault for not seeing it sooner. I hadn't wanted to deal with the pity, the whispered conversations behind my back. And now this, but there was only one person I trusted enough to talk to about this. I hit call. Jason. It was my brother, Matt, picking up on the second ring. His voice was casual, but I could hear the concern creeping in as I didn't respond right away. What's up, man? Everything okay? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. How do you explain to your brother that your wife might be pregnant with another man's child? Jay. Matt's voice became more insistent. What's going on? You're freaking me out. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and finally spoke. Emily's pregnant. There was a pause. Congratulations? I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, I don't know if it's mine. That hit like a bomb. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to wonder if he'd hung up. But then, Matt's voice came back, quiet and full of shock. What the hell are you talking about? And so, I told him everything. The affair, the neighbor, the months of betrayal. Every ugly detail that had been gnawing at me for weeks. I didn't hold back. I couldn't. Once I started, it all came pouring out. Every raw emotion I'd been bottling up since the day I caught her. By the time I finished, I was out of breath, my chest tight from the weight of it all. Matt listened quietly, not interrupting once. When I was done, he let out a long sigh. Jesus, man, I don't even know what to say. That's some serious S***T. Tell me about it? I muttered, resting my forehead against the steering wheel. I have no idea what to do. She says she wants to fix things. But how am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to deal with a kid that might not even be mine? Matt didn't answer right away, and when he finally did, his voice was careful, like he was weighing every word. You need to find out the truth. You can't make any decisions until you know for sure. Have you talked to her about a paternity test? She mentioned it, I said, my voice hollow, but I don't even know if I want to go through with it. What if it's his, Matt? What if I find out that this kid I've been dreading is actually his? There was another pause, and I could hear Matt exhaling slowly. You still deserve to know the truth, Jason. whether it's good or bad. You can't live in limbo like this, man. You'll drive yourself insane. He wasn't wrong. The uncertainty was eating me alive, but the thought of that truth, the possibility that this child was Mike's, was enough to make me sick to my stomach. But as much as I wanted to avoid it, I knew that Matt was right. I needed to know. "So, what are you gonna do?" Matt finally asked. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "I don't know. I guess I'll talk to her about the test." "But what if it's his, Matt? What the hell do I do then?" "I don't know, Jay. But whatever happens, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Just one step at a time." We said our goodbyes after that, and I was left alone again, sitting in the car, staring at the neon sign of the gas station in the distance. Matt was right, I needed to take it one step at a time. But even that felt impossible right now. When I finally got home later that night, Emily was waiting for me in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, looking small and fragile in the dim light. Her eyes were swollen and red, like she'd been crying the entire time I was gone. The sight of her like that, so broken, did something to me. As much as I hated her for what she had done, a part of me still felt something for her. Love? Maybe. Or maybe it was just the weight of our history together, the memories of the life we had built. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I was worried. I needed to think," I said, not moving from the doorway. The air between us felt thick, like we were both waiting for the other to say something, to break the unbearable tension. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "We need to do a paternity test, Emily." Her face crumpled, and fresh tears filled her eyes. "Jason, please. I need to know," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "I can't do this unless I know the truth." She looked down, wiping at her tears, and nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll do the test." There it was. The path forward, even if it was a terrifying one. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the panic that threatened to rise up again. This was the only way. I needed to know, for myself, for my sanity, for whatever might come next. But even as we agreed to take the test, I couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter the result, things would never be the same between us. Too much had been broken. Too much trust had been shattered. And there were some things you just couldn't fix, no matter how hard you tried. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. After agreeing to the paternity test, Emily and I barely spoke. Every conversation felt strained, like we were walking on broken glass, careful not to step too hard, knowing that the slightest pressure could shatter everything completely. I kept myself busy, going to work, taking longer runs, anything to avoid being at home. At night, I would lie awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I was going to do if the baby wasn't mine. My thoughts would spiral into worst-case scenarios, imagining Emily and Mike together, raising a child that should have been mine. A life that I was supposed to have. The unfairness of it all consumed me, and I hated myself for feeling so powerless. I was a stranger in my own marriage. The test itself was clinical, emotionless. We drove to the clinic together in complete silence, the tension between us unbearable. Emily kept glancing at me, as if hoping I'd offer her some kind of comfort, but I had nothing left to give. I was drained, hollowed out by weeks of betrayal, mistrust, and fear of what was to come. At the clinic, we were led into separate rooms. They took my DNA sample first, swabbing the inside of my cheek, the whole thing over in a matter of minutes. I remember sitting there afterward, the sterile smell of the room making me feel sick, thinking about how absurd it all was. How did we get here? A few months ago, I would have laughed at the idea that I'd be sitting in a clinic, waiting to find out if my own wife's child was mine or another man's. Now, it was my reality. Emily came out of her room a few minutes later. She didn't say anything, just nodded to the nurse who gave us the expected timeline. 7 to 10 days. 7 to 10 days of hell. As we walked out of the clinic, the sun felt too bright, too warm, like it didn't belong in the world we were living in. Everything around us seemed so normal. People going about their day, oblivious to the silent storm raging in my life. We got into the car, and I turned on the engine, staring straight ahead, avoiding Emily's gaze. "Jason," she started, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I know you hate me right now, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't respond. What could I say? Sorry wasn't enough. It wouldn't take away the betrayal or the weeks of lies. It wouldn't erase the image of her and Mike together, an image that had been burned into my brain since the day I found out. And now there was this child that might not even be mine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I want to make things right," she continued, her voice breaking. "I don't know how, but I do. I love you, Jason. I always have." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You sure have a funny way of showing it." That shut her up. She turned away, looking out the window as tears streamed down her face. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but a larger part of me was still too angry, too raw. I couldn't let myself be vulnerable to her again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next week was a blur of waiting, hoping, and dreading. Every day felt like a lifetime. I went to work, went through the motions, but my mind was always elsewhere, consumed by the impending test results. I barely slept. I avoided friends, family, anyone who might ask me how things were going. I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Emily and I continued our strained coexistence. We didn't fight, not anymore, but we weren't really talking either. It was like living with a ghost. She was there, but she wasn't there. I caught her crying more than once, curled up in bed or in the bathroom with the door half closed, but I couldn't bring myself to go to her. How do you comfort someone who destroyed your life? The hardest part, though, was the constant guessing. My mind wouldn't stop. Every time I looked at her, I found myself analyzing her, trying to figure out if the baby could be mine just from looking at her, as if I could read the truth on her face. Did she have that same gnawing feeling in her gut that I had? Or was she just as scared as I was? The nights were the worst. I'd lie on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to shut my brain off. What if the baby wasn't mine? Could I stay? Could I even try to raise a child that wasn't mine, knowing what it represented? The betrayal, the lies, the nights Emily spent with Mike while I was away. I couldn't picture it, not without feeling sick. But at the same time, the thought of leaving made my heart feel like it was breaking all over again. Despite everything, part of me still loved her. Or maybe it was just the memory of who she used to be before all of this happened. The Emily I fell in love with. But could I ever forgive her? Could I move past this and rebuild our life? The questions haunted me, day and night, until they were all I could think about. On the 10th day, the results finally came. I was at work when I got the call from the clinic. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, clinical, but I could barely hear the words over the pounding in my chest. "Mr. Taylor, we have the results of the paternity test." I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the news that would either destroy me or give me some semblance of hope. "The results confirm that you are the father." For a moment, I couldn't process it. I didn't even feel relief, just numbness, pure and overwhelming. The words hung in the air like a fog, wrapping around me, but not sinking in. I thanked the nurse mechanically and hung up, staring blankly at the wall in front of me. I was the father. The child was mine. I should have felt something, right? Relief, happiness, maybe even hope. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. The weight of everything. The affair, the lies, the betrayal was still there, crushing me from the inside. This wasn't a victory. It didn't change what she had done. It didn't erase the fact that she had still betrayed me with Mike, the man who lived just a few doors down. I wasn't sure what to do next. I sat there, staring at the phone, trying to convince myself that this was good news, that this meant we could move forward, that this child, my child, didn't have to carry the burden of everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. I might have been the father, but the damage had already been done. And I wasn't sure if anything could fix that. You'd think finding out the baby was mine would have brought some sense of relief, wouldn't you? That maybe, just maybe, things could start getting better. But the truth is, it didn't change anything. Not in the way I hoped it would. In fact, it made everything feel worse. Somehow. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room the moment I hung up that phone. I was the father. The baby was mine. But it didn't feel like a victory, more like a life sentence. When I got home that evening, Emily was waiting. I'd barely stepped through the front door when she came rushing over, eyes wide with anticipation. She had that nervous energy about her, the kind that made me feel like I was walking into a battlefield instead of our home. "Did you hear from the clinic?" she asked, her voice soft, hopeful. I nodded. "Yeah, I did." My voice was flat, empty. I didn't know how to feel. Her eyes searched mine, probably looking for some kind of clue as to what was coming next. "And? It's mine." The words came out like lead, heavy and cold, hanging in the air between us. I watched as Emily's face crumpled with relief, tears immediately springing to her eyes. She pressed her hands to her mouth, like she was holding back a sob. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping toward me, her hands reaching for mine. "Jason, I'm so—" I stepped back instinctively, avoiding her touch. It was a reflex I couldn't control. I wasn't ready to let her in, not yet. Not after everything. Emily froze, her hands hanging in the air for a moment before she let them fall to her sides, the rejection clear on her face. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice breaking. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want to fix this, Jason. I want us to move forward." I looked at her, at the tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in weeks, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just tired, so incredibly, bone-deep tired of all of it. The lies, the betrayal, the weight of trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. "I don't know if we can," I said quietly, finally voicing the thought that had been haunting me since the day I found out about the affair. Emily's face fell, her tears coming harder now, but I didn't move to comfort her. How could I? The truth was out in the open now, and no matter how much she cried or apologized, nothing would erase what she had done. The trust we once had was shattered, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see a way to put it back together again. "I know I messed up," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "But we can get through this, Jason. We can go to counseling, we can work on things. Please, don't give up on us." I let out a long, tired sigh, running a hand through my hair. "You think counseling is going to fix this? You think sitting in a room with some therapist talking about our feelings is going to make me forget that you slept with him?" She flinched at that, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry. I was weak. I was stupid. But I never stopped loving you. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But every time I tried, that image of her with Mike flashed through my mind, and I felt sick all over again. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Emily, this isn't just about you cheating. It's about everything else. The lies, the sneaking around, making me doubt myself. I don't even know who you are anymore. How am I supposed to trust you again?" "I know," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll give you space. I don't know if space is what I need," I interrupted, shaking my head. I need to figure out if I even want this anymore." Her face twisted in panic. "What do you mean? You're not saying you want a divorce, are you?" "I don't know," I admitted. The word divorce felt like a bomb I wasn't ready to drop. But the truth was, it had been on my mind since the day I found out about the affair. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, and I sure as hell couldn't promise her that I'd stay. Emily sank down onto the couch, her body folding in on itself as she cried harder, rocking back and forth like she was trying to hold herself together. I stood there, feeling like an outsider in my own life, watching her fall apart, and I couldn't muster any sympathy. All I could think about was how she had destroyed everything. She wanted to fix it, but I didn't even know if it was fixable. "I don't know what you want me to say," I finally muttered, my voice cold even to my own ears. "The baby's mine, fine, but that doesn't change what you did." The days following the paternity results were like living in a limbo I couldn't escape from. Emily tried to talk to me more, but every conversation felt forced, awkward. She was walking on eggshells, clearly terrified that I was one bad day away from leaving. And maybe I was. I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was that I didn't feel like myself anymore. I started spending more time away from home. Work became my sanctuary, the only place where I didn't have to think about everything that was happening. I stayed late at the office, buried myself in projects, anything to avoid going home to the constant reminders of what my life had become. When I did come home, I went straight to the couch or the spare room, making sure to avoid Emily as much as possible. I knew it wasn't fair. We were both hurting, but I didn't know how to be around her. I didn't know how to talk to her without feeling the rage bubbling up inside me. Every word she said sounded like a lie, even when I knew it wasn't. And then there was the baby. I hadn't even begun to process what that meant for us. There was a part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, that almost wished the baby wasn't mine. It would have made things simpler. It would have been easier to walk away if I didn't have a child on the way. But now everything was complicated. How was I supposed to raise a child with a woman I couldn't even look at without feeling sick? One night, after another long day at work, I came home to find Emily sitting at the dining table, a folder in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying again. I sighed, already dreading whatever conversation was about to happen. "What is it?" I asked, my voice flat. She pushed the folder toward me. "I've been looking into therapists," she said quietly. "I found a few that specialize in infidelity and marriages going through this kind of thing. I thought maybe we could try." I stared at the folder for a moment, then looked back at her. "And what if I don't want to go to therapy, Emily? What if I don't want to try?" Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling over. "Please, Jason," she whispered. "Just give us a chance. Give me a chance to make this right. For us, for the baby." I clenched my jaw, my hands balling into fists at my sides. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away, to finally let go of everything and leave this mess behind. But another part of me, the part that still remembered how much I had loved her, how much we had shared, couldn't do it. Not yet. So I sat down. I picked up the folder, and I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I stared at the folder in my hands, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should have. Inside was a list of therapists, each name a lifeline Emily was desperately clinging to. I could feel her eyes on me, full of hope and fear, like everything she was had been poured into this one moment. A part of me wanted to just toss it aside, tell her it was too late, that no therapist in the world could fix what she had broken. But instead, I opened it. We sat there in silence for a few minutes while I scanned the names, not really taking anything in. My mind was too clouded with thoughts of what this meant. If I agreed to this, to therapy, to trying, it would mean I wasn't walking away. It would mean there was still a chance we could move forward, a chance we could rebuild. But the question that kept gnawing at me was, did I even want to try? I glanced up at Emily. Her face was tense, eyes puffy from crying, lips trembling. She was waiting for some sign, any sign that I was willing to take the first step. And the truth was, I didn't know if I could. "I'll go," I said, surprising even myself. The words came out more as a reflex than a conscious decision. Emily's face crumpled, and fresh tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain. There was relief in them, maybe even a flicker of hope. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to contain her emotion. "Thank you, Jason. I know it's going to be hard, but we can get through this. I swear we can." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. The truth was, I was still angry. I was still broken. And just because I had agreed to therapy didn't mean I believed everything could be fixed. But there was a baby involved now, my baby, and I couldn't ignore that. Whether I liked it or not, I was bound to Emily by this child. A week later, we sat in a beige office that smelled faintly of lavender. The therapist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a soothing voice, introduced herself as Dr. Parker. She motioned for us to sit on the couch across from her, and as soon as we did, I felt the tension in my body spike. Everything about being here felt uncomfortable, forced. "Thank you both for coming in," Dr. Parker began, her voice gentle but firm. "I know this must be difficult for both of you, but it's a good sign that you're willing to sit down and talk." I wanted to laugh. Willing? That was a strong word for something I had agreed to out of sheer obligation. But I stayed quiet, watching as Emily shifted nervously beside me, her hands twisting in her lap. Dr. Parker looked between us, her gaze soft but probing. "Why don't we start by hearing what brought you both here today? Jason, would you like to begin?" I didn't want to begin. I didn't want to be here at all, but I took a deep breath and started talking, my words clipped and mechanical. "We've been married for 7 years. Emily had an affair with our neighbor while I was away on business trips. I found out a couple months ago, and now she's pregnant. We weren't sure if the baby was mine, but I am the father." The room went quiet, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Dr. Parker nodded, her expression unreadable as she took in what I said. Then she turned to Emily. "Emily, how would you describe the situation?" Emily sniffled, wiping at her eyes. "I made a terrible mistake. I hurt Jason and I wish I could take it all back. I was lonely, and I wasn't thinking clearly, but I never stopped loving him. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Dr. Parker leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on her notepad. "You both seem to be in a great deal of pain, and that's understandable given what's happened. Healing from something like this is going to take time. But the fact that you're both here is a sign that you're at least open to the possibility of moving forward. What I want to help you figure out is whether you can rebuild trust and whether your relationship has the foundation to recover." Rebuild trust? The idea felt almost laughable. I didn't trust Emily, not even a little, and how could I? She had betrayed me in the most personal, intimate way possible. And every time I tried to move past it, the memories of her and Mike, the lies, the sneaking around, slammed into me like a punch to the gut. Dr. Parker must have sensed my hesitation because she focused on me. "Jason, I know trust is a major issue here. It's not something that can be rebuilt overnight, and it may take longer than you're comfortable with. But it starts with open communication. Are you willing to talk about what's going through your mind?" I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. Every time I look at her, I see him. I see them together in our house while I was gone. I can't get it out of my head." Emily began to cry softly beside me, but I kept going. "It's not just the affair. It's the lies, the sneaking around. She made me feel like I was going crazy for even suspecting something was wrong. And now, there's this baby. This baby that's supposed to bring us closer, but all it's doing is making things harder." Dr. Parker nodded, letting my words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "It's completely understandable that you feel that way. Betrayal shakes the very foundation of a relationship. But you've taken the first step by expressing what you're feeling, and that's important." I glanced at Emily, who was wiping her tears away, her shoulders trembling. She looked broken, lost. A part of me hated seeing her like that, but another part, the darker part, thought, good. Now she knows how it feels. "Emily," Dr. Parker said gently, turning to her, "how are you processing everything Jason has said?" Emily took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself. "I know I hurt him," she whispered, "and I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want it. I want to earn his trust back. I want to be the wife he deserves. I don't know how to start." Dr. Parker smiled kindly. "The first step is honesty. Complete and total honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Jason needs to know that he can rely on you to be transparent, no matter how hard it is. That's the only way trust can start to rebuild." I clenched my jaw, biting back the urge to snap. Honesty? Where had that been when she was sleeping with Mike? When she was sneaking around behind my back? But I stayed silent. Over the next few weeks, we continued going to therapy. Each session was a mix of painful confessions, awkward silences, and moments where I wondered why I was even bothering. Some days I felt like maybe there was a glimmer of hope, that maybe if I worked hard enough I could move past this. But then there were other days where the anger came back full force, and I couldn't stand to even be in the same room as her. Emily, for her part, was trying. She made it a point to be open, to tell me where she was going, what she was doing, who she was talking to. She deleted Mike's number, blocked him on every social media platform, even suggested we move to get away from the constant reminder of him living just a few doors down. But none of it felt like enough. There were nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by dreams of her with him. In those dreams, I was always watching, powerless to stop it. I could never reach her, never yell out, never pull her away from him. I'd wake up angry, disoriented, and the sight of her sleeping next to me felt like an insult. And then there was the baby. As Emily's pregnancy progressed, I found myself struggling to connect. I wanted to be happy, or at least I thought I did, but every time I thought about the child, I felt conflicted. This baby was mine, but it was also a product of the most painful chapter of my life. How was I supposed to separate the two? Could I ever truly love this baby without thinking about the circumstances that brought it into the world? One evening, after another long day, Emily came into the living room where I was sitting. She looked nervous, like she had something important to say. I braced myself, already feeling exhausted by whatever new emotional minefield I was about to step into. "Jason," she began softly, sitting down next to me. "I know things have been hard, and I know you're still angry, but I need to ask you something." I didn't respond, just waited for her to continue. "I need to know if you're willing to try," she said, her voice trembling. "I mean really try, not just go." Emily's words hung in the air between us, heavy with uncertainty. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she looked at me like she was holding onto a thin thread of hope. She wanted to know if I was really willing to try, if I could find it in myself to push past everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the constant knot of anger in my chest. But I didn't have an answer for her. I sat there, staring at the floor, feeling the weight of her question pressing down on me. It wasn't as simple as just trying. How could I promise her that? How could I promise myself that I was willing to give everything back to a relationship that felt like it had already collapsed? "What do you want me to say?" I asked finally, my voice rougher than I intended. "Do you want me to just forget everything? Do you think that's even possible?" She shook her head quickly, tears welling in her eyes again. "No, of course not. I don't expect you to forget. I know it's going to take time, but I need to know if you're still in this, Jason. If you even want to try." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the Emily I used to know. The Emily who was my best friend. The one I fell in love with. The one I promised to build a life with. She was still there, buried under layers of guilt, shame, and regret. But seeing her like this, vulnerable, broken, made me question everything I thought I had decided. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the most honest thing I had said in weeks. "I don't know if I can get past this." Emily flinched, but she didn't look away. "I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance for us to try to rebuild. For the baby's sake. For our sake." The baby. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, resting there as if to remind both of us of the new life growing inside her. My child. Our child. The child that was coming whether I was ready or not. I felt a pang of guilt. I hadn't been involved in the pregnancy the way a father should be. I hadn't gone to the appointments. I hadn't asked about the baby's progress. Hell, I barely even acknowledged it was happening. I had been too wrapped up in my own anger to think about the fact that, in a few months, I was going to be a dad. Could I really walk away from that? "I know it's a lot to ask," Emily continued, her voice breaking into my thoughts. "But I love you, Jason. I made a horrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you. And I want us to be a family. I want to raise this baby together." I sat back, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to clear the fog of emotions clouding my mind. Everything felt tangled. My anger at her, my guilt over the baby, my confusion about whether I could ever truly forgive her. It was all too much. I don't know how to do this, I said quietly, my voice strained. I don't know how to let go of what happened. Every time I look at you, I see him. Every time you talk about the baby, I think about what you did. Emily swallowed hard, her tears spilling over. I'll do anything, Jason. I'll do whatever it takes. I just need to know if you'll try. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for my answer. And for a long time, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, wrestling with myself, wondering if I even had it in me to try. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spoke. I'm not going to make any promises, I said slowly, carefully. I'm not going to tell you everything will be okay, because I don't know if it will. But I'm not walking away. Not yet. Emily let out a shaky breath, her face crumpling with relief. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled back slightly, still not ready for that. The pain was still too fresh, the wound too deep. But she understood, pulling her hand back and nodding. That's all I'm asking, she whispered. Just don't give up on us. The next few weeks were a strange, uncomfortable dance. We kept going to therapy, working through the mess of emotions that hung between us, but nothing felt easy. Every session peeled back another layer of hurt, another layer of distrust. Dr. Parker pushed us to be open, to talk about the things we were both afraid to say out loud. There were moments in those sessions where I thought, maybe we can do this. Maybe, with time, I could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But then there were other moments, darker ones, where I felt like I was just going through the motions, like I was pretending to try because it was easier than confronting the reality that maybe we were already too far gone. One night, I came home late from work and found Emily sitting on the couch, looking through old photo albums. I hadn't seen those in years. They were from the early days, our first apartment, our wedding, vacations we took when we were still carefree and in love. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wet but a small smile on her face. Do you remember this? She asked, pointing to a picture of us at the beach, laughing, our arms wrapped around each other. That was such a good day. I nodded, feeling a strange ache in my chest. I did remember that day. We had spent hours walking along the shore, talking about our future, dreaming about the life we were going to build together. It was one of those perfect days where everything seemed to fall into place. We were happy, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I swallowed hard, sitting down next to her, though I kept some distance between us. Yeah, we were. Emily closed the album, resting her hand on it as she looked at me. Do you think we can ever be that happy again? I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to that. Too much had changed. We weren't the same people anymore. But there was a part of me, deep down, that still wanted to believe it was possible. That maybe, if we worked hard enough, if we tried long enough, we could find some version of happiness again. I don't know, I said honestly. I hope so. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I do too. As the weeks went on, we settled into an uneasy rhythm. Emily's pregnancy was progressing, and with every doctor's appointment, the reality of the baby grew more and more undeniable. I started going with her to the appointments, sitting in the waiting room, feeling like an outsider in my own life. But I knew I had to be there, not for Emily but for the child, my child. The first time I heard the baby's heartbeat, something inside me shifted. It was faint, a tiny, rapid sound, but it was real. And in that moment, the anger I had been carrying for so long eased just a little. This baby, innocent and unknowing, was a part of me. No matter what happened between Emily and me, I couldn't deny that. But there was still so much unresolved. Every time we had a good day, there was always a bad one waiting around the corner. We'd have a decent conversation, or a quiet night watching TV, and then I'd be blindsided by a memory of what she did with Mike. I couldn't escape it. Even when I tried to focus on the baby, the weight of her betrayal was always there, lurking beneath the surface. One night, after another awkward dinner where neither of us really knew what to say, I finally blurted out the question that had been haunting me for weeks. Why him? Emily looked up at me, her fork freezing midair. What? Why Mike? I repeated, my voice low but intense. Out of all the people, why him? What was it about him that made you do it? Her face paled, and I could see the guilt wash over her. She put her fork down, taking a deep breath before answering. I don't know. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. It wasn't about him. It was about me. I was lonely. You were gone so much and I was weak. He was there, and I let it happen. I clenched my jaw, trying to process her words. It didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it almost made it worse. The fact that it wasn't even about Mike, that it could have been anyone, made me feel like our entire relationship had been a lie. How had I missed the signs? How had I let it get this bad? I hate that it happened, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I hate that I hurt you. But I love you, Jason. I love you more than I can ever explain. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this wasn't the end. But I still didn't know if I could. The weeks turned into months, and before I knew it, Emily was nearing the end of her pregnancy. Everything felt surreal. The baby was coming, whether I was ready or not. Whether we were ready or not. The doctor's appointments were more frequent, and Emily's belly grew bigger each day. A constant reminder of the life we were about to bring into the world. A life that felt like it was hanging by a thread. But as the baby's due date approached, something else began to happen. The reality of what was coming started to crack the fragile peace we had been holding on to. The uneasy rhythm we had found was unraveling, and I could feel myself slipping back into old habits. The anger, the bitterness, the constant replaying of her betrayal. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the weight of it. One night, about 2 weeks before Emily's due date, it all came crashing down. We had just finished dinner. Another quiet, awkward meal where neither of us said much. I had been stewing all day, thoughts of her affair with Mike gnawing at me like a festering wound. I thought about all the months I had been away for work, working hard for us, while she had been sneaking around behind my back. It made me sick, made my blood boil in a way that I hadn't felt in a while. Emily must have sensed it because, as we were cleaning up, she turned to me, her eyes filled with worry. Jason, what's wrong? You've been distant all day. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to have this conversation again. But the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface finally broke through, and before I could stop myself, the words came out. What's wrong? I snapped, slamming a dish into the sink. You really want to know what's wrong? Emily flinched at my tone, her eyes widening. Jason, please. What's wrong is that I can't get over what you did. I spat, turning to face her. No matter how hard I try, no matter how many therapy sessions we go to, I can't stop thinking about you and him. About how you were here with him, in our house, in our bed, while I was gone. Her face crumpled, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was too far gone, too consumed by the rage that had been building for months. I don't know how you expect me to get past this, I continued, my voice rising. You say you want to fix things, that you love me, but all I can think about is how you betrayed me. How you threw everything we had away for some cheap thrill with the guy down the street. Jason, stop, she cried, her voice breaking as she wiped at her eyes. Please, I've apologized 1,000 times. I know I hurt you, but I've done everything I can to make it right. What more do you want from me? I want to feel like I matter, I shouted. I want to feel like I'm more than just some backup plan you're clinging to because you're pregnant and don't want to raise this baby alone. The words hit her like a slap, and she recoiled, her hand instinctively going to her belly. She stared at me, her face pale and her body trembling with sobs. That's not fair, she whispered, her voice shaky. You're not a backup plan, Jason. I love you. I love you more than I can explain. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you. I shook my head, the anger still boiling in my chest. How can you expect me to believe that, Emily? How can you say you love me when you were so willing to throw it all away? Her tears were flowing freely now, her face red and blotchy. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small. I don't know what I was thinking. I was lonely, and I felt like you were slipping away. But it was a mistake, Jason. A mistake I will regret for the rest of my life. I stood there, my chest heaving, my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists. I wanted to scream, to yell, to lash out at her for what she had done. But all I could do was stand there, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on me, crushing me under its unbearable heaviness. The silence between us was deafening. The only sound in the room, the quiet hum of the dishwasher and Emily's quiet sobs. And then, out of nowhere, she spoke again, her voice trembling with a quiet desperation that cut right through me. If you can't forgive me, if you can't move past this, then maybe you should leave. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I didn't understand what she was saying. Leave? Was that what she wanted? What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily wiped at her tears, her eyes red and swollen, her face streaked with anguish. I'm saying that if you can't move past this, then maybe you should go. Maybe we're both better off if you just leave. The room went completely still. I stared at her, my mind spinning, trying to process what she had just said. Was she giving up? After all this time, after everything we had been through, was she just giving up? You want me to leave? I asked, my voice thick with disbelief. She shook her head quickly, her tears flowing again. No, Jason, that's not what I want. But I can't keep hurting you. I can't keep watching you struggle with this. If staying with me is causing you that much pain, then maybe you're better off without me. Her words echoed in my head, and for the first time, I realized just how broken we both were. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything we had lost, everything we had become. We were two people clinging to the wreckage of a relationship that had been torn apart, and neither of us knew how to fix it. I didn't know what to say. My anger, which had felt so justified moments ago, now felt hollow, empty. I had spent so long focusing on my pain, my anger, that I hadn't stopped to think about what it was doing to her, to us. And now, standing there in the kitchen, watching her fall apart in front of me, I didn't know what to do. I don't want to leave, I said quietly, my voice shaking, but I don't know how to stay. Emily let out a sob, collapsing into one of the kitchen chairs, her head in her hands. I don't know what to do, Jason. I don't know how to make this better. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of everything we had lost pressing down on us. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for so many years, the woman who was carrying my child, and I felt a deep, aching sadness that I couldn't shake. I wanted to fix this. I wanted to find a way to make it all okay. But I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was even possible. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't say much, just told her I needed some time to think. I wasn't leaving for good, at least not yet. But I couldn't stay. Not right now. I needed space. I needed time to figure out if there was anything left to salvage. Emily didn't say much as I left. She watched me with tear-filled eyes, but she didn't try to stop me. I think she knew, just as much as I did, that we both needed this break. I drove to my brother Matt's house, feeling like a hollow shell of myself. When I pulled into his driveway, he was already waiting on the porch. I must have looked like hell because as soon as he saw me, his face fell. Jason, man, what's going on? He asked, his voice full of concern. I got out of the car, my legs shaky as I walked up to him. I think my marriage is over, Matt. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug. And for the first time in months, I let myself cry. The days that followed were quiet. I stayed at Matt's house, keeping to myself, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Emily texted me a few times, asking how I was, if I was okay, but I didn't respond. I needed space, and she respected that. The baby was coming soon, and I knew I had to figure things out before then. But the more time I spent away, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the end. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive Emily. I wasn't sure if I could ever get past what she had done. And even if I could, I wasn't sure if it would be enough. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to see things clearly. Maybe it was time to let go. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.